Guys, I am so excited to have my friend Celene Anderson on today. Celene is in the film industry. She's been doing this for a decade, and she first came on my radar because she's a producer on two of Barrett and Jessica Bergen's films, short films. We got The Angel, which you guys, if you've been following me, we've been at a public event on The Angel last year. Brilliant short Latter-day Saint horror story. And then just last month, maybe 2 months ago at Mormon History Association, I was able to watch a second film she produced, which was Java Jive. Funny, Latter-day Saints out dating. Um, I love it. You know, Celine, I'm gonna be honest, it's not singles ward level, but it's not too far from singles word level. I want that for you guys. Let's get some full featured films out. Um, but great material. You guys should be very familiar with Celene. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things today, but one of the things is that Celene actually was a speaker at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy Conference. You know what time it is. Get us started. How is this thing even on your radar?
Yeah, so I mean, this got on my radar when obviously in producing The Angel and the feature film that we're going to be making soon. Uh, that's when I was like, as a producer, being involved in the creative process, I'm like, hey, I need to be really engaged with the history and understanding specifically because it's such a female-centric story. It's like, what are these women thinking? And so I was diving into a lot more just Utah history with polygamy and specifically women's perspectives on that. And that's was like a really, I had a lot of advantages from having that be really my jumping off point, mostly because it wasn't something that was like personally emotional, right? I was engaging with it on the terms of like I want to understand these characters. So I don't need to I wasn't looking to be like I want to dismiss what they have to say that makes me uncomfortable. Or I'm worried about what does this mean for me? Like what does the history of polygamy mean about me and what I feel and what because I wasn't engaged with it on that emotional term. I was engaged with it from an artist's perspective, which is honestly what's really fun about art is really good art leans into tension and conflict and nuance and what is uncomfortable. Like I think that that's a really exciting thing that art can just like dive into. And I had a really great media training at BYU where I really appreciated the approach that my film professors had us take with films, which was fully engaging with them on their own terms. It was like, what is this film doing? And so having that similar approach where I'm engaging with these women of this in this history on their own terms, where I'm like, you tell me about you. It was really exciting, and honestly, I learned so much that I didn't know about, and it was just incredible. It was like the fact that I was born and raised in Utah, and I didn't know that women in Utah were the first women to legally vote in the United States is insane. I did not learn that at church. I did not learn that at school. Um, I I don't understand that. It was actually very fun. I've been talking to my sister more recent years about Utah history, and she's gotten more into it. And she's like, I didn't know Utah history was so exciting. I always thought it was so boring because their approach to it in school and like it's very careful.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't dive into like what's actually interesting, which are these conflicting pieces. So because of that, I had dived into those ideas and I had a lot of thoughts. Now, what was really crazy was after we had shot The Angel and we're editing it and we're going into it, this polygamy has become more and more and more of a hot topic. And like, especially talking with like the Bergens, I'm like, how is this like so serendipitous that this is becoming such uh, a major thing? And something that really frustrated me is looking into a lot of the discourse is just it's so focused on Nauvoo
Yeah.
that it kind of really ignores and erases the voices and the history of the women of Utah. And it was really disheartening to me is looking online and seeing like, oh, those women in Utah, they were just puppets of Brigham Young, and they're just victims, and so we can't take anything they said seriously. And I'm like, whoa, that's not the women that I just spent all this time learning about. That's not accurate to what I've seen.
Uh,
And so I
yes.
found that incredibly disturbing, and I did not like that. And so then I just started being more involved on like kind of online discourse and having conversations. And so how I actually got onto the the panel was talking to Jasmine. I had met with her, Jasmine Bradley, uh
I'm,
a few times, like just like, hey, this is me, and like we got lunch and I kind of gave her a lot of my thoughts on the topic. And she's like, that's so interesting. And so it was her who was moderating the panel, that she invited me to be on the panel because she had never heard anyone's perspective quite like mine.
I'm,
Uh,
I hear. I don't know Jasmine. I know she's married to my buddy
mhm.
and my old friend. Is she a scholar? Who is like?
So
How is she part of the board?
Jasmine is wild. Like I enjoy her. Like she is really fun to chat with. She like what has a very interesting like backstory where like when she like was 18, she was like, what is happening with polygamy? And she like just went on this road trip and met all these different like fundamentalists, and like went to and like started just talking to a lot of people. And so it was really interesting in kind of connecting with her, where she is just very invested in like just different people. And so she's like, she has knows all sorts of fundamentalists everywhere,
Oh,
and
okay.
is very aware of like this discourse specifically around women, and knows most of the women involved in this. Like she's very um she has a real passion about how the topic is so emotionally charged for women and how it's such a vulnerable thing. And so that was something that
Uh,
she's expressed to me, where she's like, you're one of like the only women I can talk to about this topic that doesn't get like intensely like emotional about it, who like I can have just like a level conversation about it. And I was like, oh, like that, it's because of how I've approached the topic previously and how I've like resolved it. Like it isn't a highly emotional topic for me. But
uh,
I understand why it is a highly emotional topic. It's religion and it's
uh,
sex. Like sex is such a physical and emotional intense experience, not to mention all of the insecurity that tends to be like centered around sexuality. And it's just a very intense thing. So of course um there's a lot of feelings around the topic, of course.
right. And there's a sort of ongoing conversation on, is this something that you and I would have to participate in, right? It's tough for us to kind of just remove ourselves and look at it as something that occurred and something that
Hmm.
people faced and that we have to face. But we constantly have that thought in our heads, oh my goodness, what does that mean? You know, very
Yeah.
few times have I spoken about plural marriage with my bride without her saying, um, yeah, we're if that was needed for the celestial kingdom, we'll just stay lower, you know. Um,
Yeah.
Not an exciting thing, and I really feel for that. It doesn't sound like an exciting thing for me either. Celene, I like romance. I'm a sentimental guy, right? I it's a tough thing, and from a male perspective too. I don't like to think about this other
I
than the
will
fact
say as a
great
side
stuff.
note with that, like
Yeah.
I think that like there are a lot of axioms that exist with this, where it's like, oh, romance can't exist in plural marriage. And I'm like, I don't think
Yeah.
that that's necessarily true. I think romance is already constructed. It can be reconstructed in many different ways. So, but
Well,
I understand why people feel this way. I'm just saying that there's a lot more possibilities than our emotions will let us believe. Keep going.
oh, I like that. Yeah, for me, it's the sacrifice of these people, right? That's what I don't want us to minimize is the sacrifice of all these great Latter-day Saints who some of them didn't have great experiences in this. I mean, that's the reality. But they did it because they thought God wanted them to do it and because a prophet revealed that to them, right?
Mhm.
Celine, will you tell us what happened? What is this conference? This conference occurred, what was, I don't know, 6 months ago?
March. Yeah, March of
March?
2025. Yeah.
Give me the whole story. What was it like going to this conference? Did you stay for other papers? What did you talk about? What was your panel like?
So it was like a really interesting panel lineup. Like it was exciting because I think we all were coming from really different perspectives. So it was
Mhm.
myself who was like active member of the church that affirms both the historical and the divine origin of plural marriage. Um, and then we have Whitney Horning, who does deny the history and divine origin of plural marriage, as I understand it. And then we have Margaret Toscano.
Whitney's Whitney's a associated with Denver Snuffer, right? Is that right?
That's my understanding, but I do not personally know Whitney, but I believe that there is an association there. What the precise association is,
Okay.
I could not, I don't personally know, but I have
Okay.
suspicions.
I thought that was public. Okay.
Well, I don't know because I haven't like I'm not like sitting there
Okay.
investigating her. I probably should have investigated her more, but I'm aware that she has been on, she had previously been on Michelle's podcast. I know she had written a
Mhm.
book. I know that like she is in those spaces. Like I knew that she was on that panel representing specifically the polygamy denial perspective. And I use the term polygamy denial because I believe it's encompassing. It encompasses both the historical skepticism of Joseph Smith practicing polygamy, and it also encompasses claiming that plural marriage didn't have divine origin. Like I do use that as an umbrella term,
Okay.
um, where it's
Interesting.
either denying the history or the divinity of it.
Okay.
Um, then we also had Margaret Toscano, who like famous like feminist scholar. She was her husband was one of the September 6, and then she was excommunicated after that. She is
Right.
a professor at the U. She was really fun to meet. It was fun to chat with her. And
That's a,
then Charlotte Erickson, who is a practicing polygamist. She and her husband were raised mainstream members of the church and then practiced polygamy, obviously excommunicated for that. I know that they also embrace some aspects of like more like Judaism, like they're kind of their more independent sort of
uh,
organization.
hey,
So they're not AUB, they're not FLDS or those things, but I think it's Torah keepers, I think is the term that they have. I'm
Torah
not,
keepers.
yeah,
I
there's
don't know the
some
Ericksons,
things
but
there.
I've heard about this, right? And so they're practicing feasts, Jewish feasts, and
Yes,
maybe
they do those things.
a few things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it was the four of us, and the purpose of it was a women's perspectives panel. And like we were four women with very different perspectives.
Mm.
And so like honestly, the panel itself, I had a good time. Like I thought it was really fun. I don't feel like most of the people at the conference were really jazzed I was there. But that's okay. You know, I had a few people who liked what I had to say, so that was nice.
Mm. Mm. Was it? I talked to someone else who spoke, and they kind of give the impression that when there was something that was presented from a polygamy skeptic perspective, people were like visibly excited. And
Yes.
when it was not from a polygamy skeptic, it was kind of a a kind of visibly negative response. Is that
Yes.
true? That
Yes.
was true?
I do know after my panel, um, there was a woman in the lobby who was crying about it. So, which I'm like,
Mm.
sorry, but also like, I mean, that just shows like how intense this is, where like it is this is emotionally intense. And so the fact that I'm even suggesting certain things on that panel was alarming and disturbing and like literally literally triggering like a fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Um, which it's like when we're in the public sphere talking about these things, like there is a risk of people saying things you don't like. Like that's just an inherent risk of existing in public discourse. If
Right.
you can't handle that emotionally, which is fine, if you can't handle that emotionally, you should not be engaging in this. If you can't have a debate on these topics and be confronted with information or perspectives that you don't like and that you can't have a conversation about it without breaking down and kind of manipulating the other person to feeling like bad for you and have to comfort you, then it's like we're not in public discourse anymore. Like this,
Ugh.
that's fine if that's necessary for you, but that can't be part of the public debate or public discourse on this topic. It doesn't make any sense. We can't get anywhere with that.
No, that's good. I'm a professional scholar. That's what I do for a living. I got my PhD in 2015, but I've been going to academic conferences for like, you know, most of a decade before that. I have
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like a different beast than any of the academic conferences I've attended, including even apologetic conferences. It's very unusual to have it, one, so emotionally charged, but to have the main people in the audience be more like fans rather than participants in scholarly discourse, right? It's
Yes.
one of the reasons I decided not to attend the Jomp conference. Maybe I'll go this year. I have a lot of fans in that circle at this point. You guys know who you are. But um but I'm really proud of you for doing that. I
Thank
think
you.
it's important that other voices are there, particularly um it, I I think one of Jomp's big goals is certainly for us to take seriously this new polygamy skeptic discourse. Um but in so much that they're willing to have the other side, what they call the traditional LDS narrative, which, by the way, I don't know that you're actually sharing, Celene. Yeah,
I'm like my own thing, but yeah, keep going.
that's right. That's right. So much that they're willing to have this other um, discourse present, we need to, there, it should be there. And I particularly appreciate that you went there on a woman's panel, because the big criticism I keep seeing is that, oh, it's men on one side and women on the other. Talk to me about that.
I find that really frustrating because first of all, that is an ad hominem attack where it's like, oh, you're making your case because you're a man, so it's like so if it's about the history, the gender is irrelevant. Like
Mhm.
no one's gender matters in this question at all. Like that's an ad hominem attack about like who's representing that information. Like that's nonsensical. If it's an emotional criticism, then yes, right? If we're having a thing where it's like this is an emotional matter and how men emotionally engage with plural marriage is different from how women engage with plural marriage, like, okay, let's call it that that's what it is, which is separate from the historical argument, right? I also just don't think that that is accurate. I think that I've had lots of conversations with women who are um, calmer about this topic. But the thing is, like, when it feels threatening to you, whether or not that's accurate, because how we feel about something doesn't necessarily mean that that's accurate. Um, there are some vocal women, but this idea that like it's only women talk, I don't know. It was very frustrating, especially very recently, seeing that represented in that way. Um, it's
Mm.
almost like it to a degree, it's very funny because it's very the polygamy denial does take a monogamous approach to these things where it's like Emma Smith is the only woman. We don't need all the other women involved. It's only Emma, just Emma, right? And then
Yeah.
it's like there's no other women, just Michelle. And I'm not saying that like Emma didn't serve like an important process, like purpose, and that we should ignore what she has to say. I'm not saying that. I mean, Michelle has obviously caused quite a splash, right? She has a huge amount of influence. And I'm not trying to like undercut that. But this idea that like these are the only women, I'm like, what the heck? Something that really frustrated me is so at the beginning of this year when there was the children's stories for the Doctrine and Covenants year, there's the plural marriage one, right? And that
Uh-huh.
got a lot, like people were really upset about that one. They're writing letters, they're like, this has got to change.
Remember.
The church did change it, right? What I found particularly disturbing, because I did do a before and after comparison, every single panel with women was removed. Every single panel that represented the perspective and experience of women was removed. And I'm like, great, congratulations, everyone. You removed the voices and experiences of women from that story.
Uh,
And I was genuinely like really frustrated about that. Not with the church. I think the church was put in a position that I understand why they made that decision. But the pushback when you erase polygamy, you erase women. Like I see that over and over and over again. And
yes.
I find that really frustrating. And the idea of imposing, when you impose victimhood on someone, you take away their voice. And I find that extremely distasteful. The idea that all these women can spend their lives, because, like, yes, no one's saying it wasn't a sacrifice in many cases, right? But the fact that
Oh, yeah.
these
Well,
women spent so many of these women spent their lives like screaming, I'm not a victim and I'm making my own choices, just to be told in their lifetime, no, you're a victim, like, sorry, you don't know what you're saying. And then to have their own descendants say that to them now is just despicable to me. I
oh,
hate it.
God. It's the classic anti-cult, anti-Mormon rhetoric where we're all a bunch of dupes, right? We can't have
Yeah.
our own agency to express how we actually feel or what we actually believe. It's
Yeah.
all just us being manipulated by some tyrant. Um, yeah, well said, Celine. So you have some things you've been thinking about. We actually had a conversation, and I'd love for you to talk to me about um, specifically, I mean, I guess we'd call it kind of strategies that polygamy skepticism uses that aren't so tied into the history, but really tied into the emotion.
Yeah. So there's a lot that goes on with this, obviously. Something that I find really frustrating is when I see this topic online. I mean, saying like, oh, you're a man and you're defending polygamy, it's because you're sexually deviant. Like that, I'm like, okay, thanks. Like that's like I find that very frustrating. And I think that that's wrong to impose on men who are trying to defend this narrative. Um,
Mm,
Also, there is this tendency to become emotional about the topic and like force the person you're disagreeing with to like emotionally comfort you. That is something that I have witnessed, at least at specific points on Michelle Stone's podcast that was previously on YouTube. That when the going got tough, there was crying, and it was forcing the other person to comfort her rather than engaging in the debate or conversation. And I'm just like, that's fine if you're having a conversation with someone, but like that's not the purpose of public discourse, right? It's not supposed to be a therapy session. It's supposed to be like, let's get at the truth of it. Now there are some things that we've had a lot of conversation about logical fallacies. This is obviously uh mistakes in like our reasoning in our brain. And I think that something that's really beautiful about the gospel is the Lord telling us to, like, He will tell us in our minds and our hearts, search it out in your minds and your hearts, like that we have this both of these things. And so in our minds we have logic, we logic through things. We can have logical fallacies. In our heart
mm,
we can intuit and feel things, and we have something called cognitive distortions.
mm,
So I do think that this debate does come down to how we feel about plural marriage. That's really what this comes down to. It's all the history and the documents and whatever I think is ancillary to the debate. I do think that scholars such as yourself do have an obligation to address that, not an obligation, but like you should address those things. I think that that is
yeah.
important still, but it's an emotional thing. I recommend reading the book The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt. It talks about how
Mm.
our moral judgments are like intuitive and gut reactionary, and that's why we have so many like divisions. And it's the justifications that come after that. We make our moral judgments of something on a gut level, and then we make justifications afterwards. So when we
Mm.
rely on our emotions to tell us the truth, we tend to engage what's called cognitive distortions. So cognitive distortions are errors in our thinking that don't match up with the reality of what's happening. It's how we feel about reality. It's the ways our mind does convince us that things aren't true. So I'm going to go through a list of examples of cognitive distortions and examples that I have seen on these topics. So the first one is magnification or minimization. So this is something exaggerating or minimizing the importance of events or situations, making them excessively important or unimportant. So I think we see this
Mm.
often with like, I only view certain kinds of evidence as valid and give it a disproportionate weight of validity. This is different from assessing a source is reliable or not. This is like, I value this one. Let's minimize that. It's in that distorted way. It's not reflecting reality. Shoulds or
Mm.
must statements, a belief that things should be a certain way. It's meant to elicit guilt or accusation and be critical. It's this way of like, this is how the world ought to be. And so that one is like men shouldn't want to have sex with more than one woman. Like that shouldn't be a thing. Um, Even though we can look at like the Coolidge effect, and that's actually a fairly normal sexual thing from men. It's not sexually deviant, actually. Not to say that men shouldn't have self-control, but it isn't atypical. But they shouldn't want that.
Mm.
Emotional reasoning. So the assumption that your emotions reflect reality. So the idea of polygamy makes me uncomfortable, and so that is sufficient proof to prove that it is inherently wrong. Mental filter, paying attention to only certain kinds of evidence. Emma Smith's viewpoint is the only woman's perspective I'll engage with. That's an example of that. Black or
Mm.
white or all or nothing thinking. This is thinking in absolutes. This is always or never. Polygamy is always bad in every single way for every person. I think
Mm.
that's really difficult to actually defend. Um,
Mm.
Blaming, taking responsibility when something wasn't your fault or shifting it to someone else when it was. The insecurity I feel around this topic is the fault of the church and church history, not my own insecurities and self-doubt about myself and my relationships. Like, we blame the church history and the church narrative for how we feel about this. Jumping to conclusions or mind reading. Imagining that we know what others are thinking, taking it beyond what they have actually said. I've had this said to me or commented at me, where it's this idea people who advocate or defend like plural marriage believe women are worth less than men and should be treated like property. And it's like, I've never said that ever at one point, but because I'm willing to defend this, people will impose that thought upon me.
Mm.
Um, Fortune telling, predicting the future with impossible certainty. A future where I'm in a polygamous family would be torture, and I would be discarded and devalued and unloved by my husband, and I would be expendable and sad. Um, it's this idea of like, if that was the case, this would happen. And it's like, well, that's fortune telling. You're assuming and imposing that that's the cause and effect.
Yeah.
Overgeneralization. So this is broad interpretation from a single or a few events and connecting dots that don't go together. Warren Jeffs was a pedophile. Polygamists are pedophiles and sexually deviant. How the FLDS have approached polygamy is the only way it can be and has ever been practiced. The logic does not follow. Labeling, using adjectives to sum up the whole of something and forgetting that nothing is one-dimensional. Polygamy is an abusive abomination. So those are really standard fare for what I see in this discourse, and they are all emotionally motivated ways of approaching it. And I mean, I can admit that like I will get emotional in the ways of like the ways that we ignore women's voices. That does
Mm.
get me a little fired up because I do think that that is something that I'm like, I think it's stripping women of their agency and their voice and their ability to be agents. And I really, really dislike that. But the other things I don't get as emotional about. But these are examples of this. And now, in part, I do think some of our approach culturally towards promptings and revelation and the Holy Ghost are partially to blame for how pervasive a lot of this approach will be.
Mm,
Like especially the I feel uncomfortable with polygamy. That's the spirit telling me that it's wrong.
yeah.
Um, I remember growing up, and I've even talked to like my sister about this. I'm like, do you remember hearing this? I remember growing up hearing the question, how do I know if it's the Holy Ghost or just my own thoughts? And the answer would normally be, well, as long as it's a good thought, then it doesn't matter. Then it's fine. Um, and
Moroni,
I what? Say it again.
Moroni 7 approach.
Yes. And
Yes.
I'm like, no, it does matter though, because the difference is like, as Latter-day Saints, when we are confirmed a member of the church, we are given the gift of the Holy Ghost. But the gift of the Holy Ghost and the gift of discernment are separate spiritual gifts. I do believe that those with the gift of the Holy Ghost have the capacity to develop discernment, but it is a separate spiritual gift. And
Mm,
it takes work to acquire and accurate understanding of the gospel. And I do think that there's a lot of danger in conflating the burning in your bosom with your emotions and conflating feeling uncomfortable with the spirit leaving you. Those are
yeah.
separate things. And I understand why they get conflated. Um, but we need to be able to parse those out if we're going to be claiming revelation and
I
also
think
knowing how we discern that.
this is so
What?
important. I think this is so important. I can imagine that, I look at like some of the comments we get on this channel, and I can imagine the person writing this feels like adrenaline and excitement, like this is going to be perfect to say. Um, and I wonder if they can mistake that sort of excitement, thinking like I'm a defender of my position for God testifying to them. Um,
Yeah. I mean, we
very,
see this happened in the early church. We saw this happen where it's like, whoa, like you guys are starting to get crazy when you're just feeling a lot of strong feelings. And like,
yeah,
yeah, like this happened, right?
right.
But yeah, and I do want to say that like while I defend this aspect, like I do think that there's still valid criticisms of polygamy, but I just don't think that things are black and white. I think that truth tends to be really nuanced. It tends to be proving contraries. I do think that social systems have costs and benefits and responsibilities and privileges, and there's usually an ideal way to operate it and a corrupt way to operate it. And I think that that's exciting to experiment with and think about and parse out. Um, but then I look at something like the Ghost of Eternal Polygamy, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is entirely cognitive distortions. It's completely emotional reasoning. There's no like theological logical thing. It's all and I would say not even emotional, it's the cognitive distortion of the emotion because it preys on the insecurities and fears of women. I find it actually a very predatory book where it
Mm.
wants to increase the existing insecurity and fear of women or plant it there if it's not already there. And this is something I see that polygamy denial continually does. It exploits the fear of women and the guilt and shame of men. And those are not necessarily based on reality. There's an inability to engage with nuance. There's an inability to be like, yes, there's abuses in the past for plural marriage, and yes, there were sacrifices, but there are also women who are like, I'm choosing this, and this has refined me, and this has improved my life, and I love this. And we're
Uh,
like, scared to um, allow that to be true for them. Like that could be true for them, and I'm fine with that. Um, and I think that when there's no room to entertain the possible benefits and validate the experiences of people who have had positive experiences and like speculate on like what were the problems, what could have been the solutions, like I'm definitely willing to engage with the abuses and like and things that we should condemn about it. But it's frustrating, like it's just really frustrating to me how much it erases the voices of women.
Next time on Skeptic, Celene talks about the history of women in early Utah. Join us Monday.